Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 221 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, and in person this time, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Yes, we are here together, recording on February 13th, able to be together this President's Day weekend. So it's kind of a fun occasion for me, recording live from the Schmitz motorhome, as it happens to be. Dad's unfortunately feeling a little under the weather, but he's on the mend, so you might hear that in his voice a bit, but he's here to talk some Nebraska football.
There you go.
Yes, and we are, of course, a father-son duo here to talk about college football by college football fans for college football fans. And today we'll be kind of doing our belated recap of the national championship game, going over our final predictions for that game and how everything turned out, as well as going over the Nebraska-related news that has happened in the past month or so since we last did our podcast. But before we dive into all that, we've got our cold beverages to open here. I've got myself a Coors Edge in a bottle.
There you go. And I've got a Mango Kolsch that's made by the Filling Station Brewing Company out of Traverse City, Michigan. So it's a wonderful local beer from Traverse City.
All right. Cheers.
Ready? Cheers.
All righty. So to dive into things, we're going to go back to our predictions from the previous podcast for the national championship game. We both said that Indiana would win. I said it would be 33-24 Miami. While you went a little lower scoring, said it'd be 28 Indiana to 17 Miami. The final score ended up being 27 Indiana to 21 Miami. So you're pretty darn close with your score, though Miami scored 4 more points than you expected.
Right.
So yeah, they made it a bit closer, I think, than we anticipated. Even, we were giving them a bit of a benefit because it was their home stadium and all that.
Right. Which turned out to have some impact, I think, on the game, just in terms of, how it played out.
Right. Although Indiana certainly did travel well. There were plenty of Indiana fans there.
It wasn't a home field advantage because of crowd. It was more about comfort level, being in your home stadium.
Right. But yeah, and thankfully it ended up being a great back and forth game, kind of a defensive battle in the first half, but then the scoring kind of exploding out more in the second half. And from what I saw, it got good viewership, 33.2 million viewers, the highest for college football since 2015.
Wow. And I'm going to have to assign a lot of that to Indiana, right? The Indiana story was compelling for even people who are not rabid college football fans. Miami being there, yeah, that's interesting, and they have a bit of a national following, probably bigger than their actual following, their own fan base. But the big driver was IU.
Yes, right. Well, yeah, that was what was exciting, was because both teams were kind of underdogs. Both teams had fought their way to get there, Miami being the 10th seeded team and all that. So both had good storylines going into the game.
Right.
And I went ahead, obviously, we both watched the game live when it happened, and then we've kind of refreshed here more recently on what happened in the game. So yeah, at halftime, it was actually 10-0 because Miami finally got something going near the end of the half, but then doinked a 50-yard field goal.
Right.
Which, those 3 points would have been significant had they gotten them.
True.
But yeah, it was kind of looking to me like one of those where Indiana was kind of dominating the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
And, seemed to be in control, but they weren't getting the points to show for it.
Exactly. And Miami hadn't really threatened that much other than, that one opportunity for a field goal. So, yeah, it looked like Indiana was the more complete team at halftime. And but like you said, they had missed out on some opportunities for 7 and had to settle for field goal. So it was 10-0, right, at halftime.
Yeah.
But it seemed like it should be more than that.
Right. And then Miami kind of proves the point by coming out early in the third quarter, and their running back breaks a 57-yard run for a touchdown. So all of a sudden it's 10-7, and they're right back in the game.
Yep.
And Indiana doesn't do much after that. But they do manage to pin Miami deep via punting. So Miami gets the ball, also gets stuffed, and then one of their blockers completely whiffs on his punt block, and Indiana gets back there, blocks the punt, gets a touchdown off of that, which was massive.
Absolutely. Play of the game.
Yes. I mean, I would say there were 2 plays of the game.
Well, you're right. There's one more coming up.
And that was one of them for sure.
Yep.
But yeah, that was a huge one because when you look at the final stats, you can kind of see how competitive Miami really was. They actually out-yarded Indiana 342 to 317.
Yeah. But, again, that running back Fletcher, that huge run for a touchdown that he had early in that third quarter was massive because up till then they really hadn't had a lot of offense.
No.
And so that was huge and obviously helped their stats then too.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, when you look down the stats, Miami had 7 penalties for 60 yards. Indiana had 5 for 38. So on most of the stats, they were pretty even, 15 first downs versus 20. The 2 that really stand out, obviously, turnovers, the one being the one that Miami had at the very end of the game, and then time of possession where Indiana dominated 36 to 24.
See, and that's the indication that usually when you have that kind of dominant control of the offense, it's because Miami is scoring so fast that they're not getting any time of possession, or one team's really beating the other one badly. And Miami had not scored quickly, so you would think the opposite.
But in the second half, they kind of started to, right? Like
Absolutely.
They had a drive that was like 6 plays long, and they went down the length of the field and scored.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of looked like they were keeping it interesting. Whenever Indiana scored and it seemed like they might pull away, Miami would find a way in the second half to score again.
Correct. Yep.
And that, of course, then led to 2 different fourth downs that Indiana went for later in the fourth quarter, with the big one being the 4th and 5 with 9:27 left to go in the game at the 13-yard line, right?
Right.
So they could have kicked the field goal, and it looked like they were going to, and then Cignetti called a timeout, which you recall he called another timeout earlier in the drive. So
and I was very critical of him at that point.
Yeah, he was down to just 1.
Extremely critical. I thought, man, they're losing their composure here.
Yep. But he calls the timeout. They decide to go for it instead of kicking the field goal.
On a 4th and 5 from the 13-yard line.
Yep. And
they're ahead by 3 at that point.
Yes, correct. That was a crazy call, especially when Fernando Mendoza talked about that play later after the game, and he said that they had noticed, some tells for Miami in that formation. So I believe what he was told was like, if their secondary, goes back, you're gonna keep it and run. If they stay tight, you're gonna throw it to this guy who's gonna be open now. That was the play.
Gotcha.
And according to Mendoza, I think it wasn't either or. It was like one of the guys stayed back and one of them stayed tight.
Gotcha.
And he just made the split-second decision to tuck it and run it, which he hadn't done all game. So it caught me by surprise.
Absolutely.
And not only did they get the first down, he's getting hit, he extends out and just barely gets the touchdown in the play that's going to go down in college football history.
Right.
For sure.
It was a remarkable run, a remarkable play call, because, again, what are the chances? What's the percentages? If you go, Moneyball, statistical analysis, what does the book say? The book definitely doesn't say go for it on 4th and 5 on your 13-yard line when you have a 3-point lead in the fourth quarter.
Right.
You kick that field goal, you get your 6 points, and you trust your defense. That's what you do.
Right.
But he did not do that.
And
he took 2 timeouts in a short period of time that led up to that. Not that he took them in a row, but you know what I mean.
It was both on that drive.
It was both on that drive, and I'm thinking, you're going to need those timeouts at the end of the game, man.
Right. But Cignetti was proven right on the decision because Miami got the ball back and scored again.
True.
So that cut down the lead again. Whereas
I don't believe that's true, but go on.
Well, no, because like you're right. Indiana 3-point lead. So They scored 7. Now they're up to a 10-point lead.
Nope.
But then,
then
Miami scored 7 back.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
So they still retained their lead. Whereas if they had just kicked the field goal, they would have been down by 1. Then when they got the ball back,
Right.
But Indiana got the ball back and did a good job of getting first downs, killing clock.
Yep.
And they were at the point where they just needed like 1 or 2 more first downs and the game was over. You know, Miami was running out of time.
Right.
And they had they had the ball on 2nd and 1, as you recall, because they had a good first down drive. And then one of Indiana's players had a false start, which moved him back to 2nd and 6. And Miami stuffed him twice.
Right.
Forced Indiana to kick a field goal. So now they were up to a 6-point lead.
Yep.
But Miami just needed a touchdown. They were left with a minute 58.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So which is plenty of time for Miami. You know, they still had 2 timeouts.
Yes.
And then Miami once again, right? They got some first downs. You know, it was looking like they might be able to pull this off. And
I think they got to like the 50-yard line or even over into Indiana territory.
It was the 41-yard line of Indiana. With 51 seconds left, so still a good bit of time on the clock.
Yep.
And then, you know, I don't know if this was Beck or their offensive coordinator, but they decided to go deep there, and Carson Beck lost control of the ball, and Indiana picks it off, and it's game over.
Game over, right. Exactly.
Which apparently has kind of been a signature for Beck, that he's lost multiple games on, you know, game-losing interceptions throughout his career.
Right, okay. Interesting. That does not bode well for his NFL future then.
Right. To his credit, right, he played pretty well throughout the game. You know, he was 19 of 32 on passing it for 232 yards.
Right.
You know, so not a great day, but not a terrible day either.
And that was the only turnover of the game, official turnover.
Well,
the block punt is not considered a turnover.
Right. So yeah, but I count that. So that's 2 turnovers for Miami. So yeah, you know, Indiana caps it off. You know, pulling off this historic season. You know, being 16-0 right at the end of their season. Right. And, you know, pulling off this amazing comeback from being the losingest, you know, team in
Division I history.
In Division I college football to now winning the national championship.
Right.
You know, in year 2 of Kurt Cignetti.
That is an absolute storybook, you know, Hoosiers-esque, ironically, type of, you know, sports drama that they don't even have to make up. I mean, it's all they have to do is be factual.
Well, and, you know, you've been saying throughout the last few episodes of the podcast that they're going to make a movie out of this run, and they definitely will.
Oh, they will.
You know, that 4th and 5 run by Mendoza, like, there's nothing more cinematic than that.
Exactly.
I mean, come on. You could have scripted it better.
You couldn't have. You're exactly right. And really, overall, the game, just some overall comments, really pretty exceptional defense being played by both teams. Very physical.
Yep.
But I need to be critical of the referees again, because especially early in the game, they missed on some massive penalties that they ignored, and early it was all in favor of Miami. I mean, the guy who basically targeted on Mendoza and made his chin and face bloody should have been reviewed, and I don't know how that's not considered. He launched with the crown of his helmet up into Mendoza's chin and face.
And it was late.
And it was, and they didn't call it. How does that happen? You know, and so to me, that just calls into question, what do we got to do to catch those things? Do we have to have another referee? Do we need to add another ref to the field to get more of that stuff called? And then additionally, the defensive backs were being able to mug the receivers. There lots of physical contact, lots of grabbing on the back side of the shoulder and holding on to hands and arms and grabbing at the backside so that they can reach across and block on the front side, you know, which frankly should be penalties and were penalties in the Big Ten, you know, throughout the season. But then for this national championship game, they were letting them play, right?
Right.
And I hate it when those things change. There should be no difference in how a game is reffed from championship to regular season. It's the same game. The refereeing should be the same. And these guys should be the best referees. And yet, that's not what was demonstrated. So to me, there's an issue that football has to address.
I mean, I do think it's good, in this case it was a Big 12 ref crew,
right?
That they get a ref crew that's not from one of the two conferences that's represented in the game.
And I get that. That's fine. But that's where we need to have a national organization of officials. They all have to report to the same structure and committee
rather than
review.
Conferences.
And all of those groups need to be being reviewed on a weekly basis like the NFL refs are. And if you're messing up and you're not consistently calling plays properly or the same as others, there needs to be some method for either removing those people or correcting them, right? You now, you need to, this is a penalty, this is not, and you need to understand that line and start calling it correctly, because what you did here and here and here is wrong, okay? And then you wouldn't have these regional biases, these conference biases that exist, because they all have their own separate crews.
Right. Yeah, I also want to point out that there was a blatant face mask by Miami on Indiana that did not get called either. That would have been significant.
Right.
But on the other hand, Indiana's players on defense were also getting in handsy with Miami's receivers.
Yes.
That could have been pass interference. That wasn't called either. So they were letting the boys play, as they say.
And there was also holding, absurd holding going on both sides.
Right.
I mean, Indiana was holding and Miami was holding. The idea that you can grab somebody on the outside of the shoulder pads and basically guide them and direct them. If you can get to somebody's shoulders and you can now turn and twist somebody, so you can direct them wherever you want to direct them, you can make some really big holes. And the big run by the Miami guy was absolutely created by a guy who grabbed the defensive back from Indiana and literally grabbed him on the shoulders and turned him to create that hole. And, again, how is that not a flag?
Right. So, that's a drum we've beaten in the past, talking about, nationalizing the ref process, and putting more rules in place and all that sort of stuff.
And I'm okay if they have to add if they think they have to add another person or whatever, because they don't want to slow down the game by having more reviews. I get that. So if you're not going to use technology, electronics somehow, to, quickly review, some of these calls, then you got to get another guy on the field who has another, so you can change up all of those refs' roles so they can focus more on a smaller part of the action.
Right. Well, and we have all this new money, right, coming into college football to pay the players and these bigger TV contracts and all that stuff. Surely we could, given how important refereeing is to the game, can we dedicate 0.5% of that larger pie or whatever that everybody contributes into to pay the refs more like they are in the NFL?
Right.
And then, to make it, more formal and something like that.
Yes.
Somehow
we've got to do that. And with gambling now going on in college sports, which didn't used to happen years ago, or at least it wasn't legal.
Right.
Now it's even more important that those refs are paid and that there's more of a structure in place to ensure integrity.
Right. Another crazy stat that I saw about Indiana's season, which is pretty wild, is that Indiana only lost one fumble the entire season this year, and it was in the first quarter of their first game. So basically they had one early cough up. After that, no fumbles.
That is remarkable.
Given that they've ran the ball a good amount.
Yes. Well, and even a quarterback. I mean, every now and then you're going to get hit while throwing the football by somebody or whatever, and it's going to bounce out of there, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you could play 16 games,
right,
and have one turnover is ridiculous.
Yeah. So, obviously we're happy with the result. Another win for the Big Ten. Happy about that. And this is now marking the third year in a row now where the Big Ten has won the national championship and no SEC team has been in the national championship at all. Obviously that is, maybe the first year you could say, oh, it was a one-off, but now we're in year 3, it's becoming a trend.
Right.
So the question is, when will the national conversation start to shift where it is now the standard rule that the Big Ten is the best conference in the country, not the SEC? Because, that's what's been proven on the field now for 3 years in a row.
My answer is it's not gonna. Not gonna happen. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is the loudest voice, the one that gets repeated over and over and over again, is the ESPN brand. Even though Fox Sports, which obviously owns the Big Ten Network and the Big Ten Conference for the most part, they can chirp and say what they want about the fact that the Big Ten has now demonstrated that they've had the best conference for the last 3 years, and that goes beyond just winning the national championship. That's also about the bowl game records and some of the other non-conference or interconference related data has definitely leaned to the Big Ten. But the messaging is so powerful coming from the 4-letter network that ain't going to change. And then there's a second thing. I observed a very clear and distinctive occurrence this year in the 2026 portal window. And that is that a ton of SEC teams were absolutely spending money like drunk sailors. I'm serious. Like, all of them were, and they were taking a bunch of good talent, good to great talent, from the Big Ten. So there were a bunch of players who were, for whatever reason, maybe they were not quite starters, or maybe they thought they could get more, catches or more carries or whatever. Right. There's a bunch of players from the Big Ten that left the Big Ten and are now getting paid better in the SEC. So I think the SEC has woken up to we got to get back to writing our big checks like we did before, but now that it's legal, we're going to have to adjust the amount.
Right. Well, because that has been part of the narrative of why the changes happened, because the SEC, because of its location in the South, had the proximity access to the best talent, in the country.
Right.
So they had that kind of built-in advantage. They were able to take care of more in the era before the transfer portal and NIL and all that stuff. And with the advent of NIL, a lot of these northern schools or the California schools, they do have a lot of money. They're from bigger states, things like that, bigger alumni bases. So they, in some ways, have more resources to throw at things than a lot of the SEC schools too, which some of those are poorer states, and things of that nature, smaller alumni bases. So the narrative was that the Big Ten was outspending the SEC, and that was part of the reason why they were now having this improvement. Right. But you're saying the pendulum's kind of swinging back the other way now?
Absolutely. 'Cause there's so much that goes into this, okay? And I think after more time goes by, we're going to see some trends that are going to happen. And one of those trends is the schools that have wealthy alumni who are in high-risk, high-reward type of business ventures, okay?
Right.
Those schools are going to do extremely well in this until they figure out a way to lock the doors somehow on this crazy pay-for-play spending that people are doing for NIL, which is a whole nother topic that we'll pick up sometime in this off-season.
Right.
But the bottom line is, when you're from oil country in Texas and Louisiana, and that sort of thing, or you're in an environment where a lot of your best alumni are super high risk, entrepreneurs who are speculative entrepreneurs, right? Then those are the people that are going to be willing and comfortable spending the money on NIL.
Right.
Okay,
potential.
Where more conservative schools with that tend to the more traditional work hard,
Lawyers.
make your money over time. No, like the difference between Warren Buffett and how he invests his money and an oilman. An oilman will spend $400 million to buy land on speculation in the hopes that he hits 3 oil wells on the property that he bought, right? And feel completely comfortable risking that $400 million.
Right. Right. Because he'll make billions if he's right.
Right. And Warren is going to buy Coca-Cola and hold it for the next 40 years.
Right.
Okay. That's a very different mentality, right? And so one of those mentalities, very comfortable with this very speculative aspect of throwing money at an individual athlete, and he may be successful, he may never pan out. And he's okay with that. If it doesn't happen, that's money under the bridge. No big deal. Where I think people who grew up and made their money doing, conservative investing over time value, all that sort of stuff, they're going to be far less comfortable spending that kind of money. Does that make sense?
Right. Yep. Okay. No.
And I think that is a fundamental thing that we're seeing at play here. Mark Cuban at Indiana. Mark Cuban is a billionaire who's grew his business portfolio by basically buying businesses and risking and having successes and having failures and, just over time, though, accumulate. So the idea of spending tens of millions of dollars on a speculative small business that may fold in a year and now your money's gone or might become a $300 million business, that's what he does for a living.
Right.
Comfortable with that.
Right. Right. Obviously, Indiana is in the Big Ten, but they're with that sort of philosophy.
It's the mentality.
Though, as I've mentioned in the past, that sort of philosophy, especially in the world of college sports, might help you out in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to whiff, law
of averages.
Kurt Cignetti, right, is the exception, right? Because obviously he's an amazing talent evaluator, as we've come to see. But if you are whiffing, just as often as you're choosing a player that's successful, or even whiffing more often or whatever, and you're throwing out these crazy amounts of money, eventually the tax man's going to come calling, right? Or the bill's going to come due that, like, you've been spending money like a drunk sailor,
right?
And it's only paid out, half of what you were hoping it would, or whatever.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. At some point, some of those people who are willing to make those investments now, if they don't translate to at least conference championships or entrances into the playoff, do those investors, those boosters, stop providing that money at that level?
Right.
So somehow you've got to keep that gravy train flowing, even if initially you don't have success.
Yep.
And then if you start having enough success, I think it builds on itself. And that's where Indiana has a great opportunity now to not only establish what they've established over the last couple of years, but to create a situation that sustains it because they continue to have sustained success.
I will say, I'm going to be curious to see what happens with Indiana, because obviously Mendoza, their Heisman winning quarterback, is gone, but they're bringing in this transfer from TCU who seems to fit their system well. So I'm sure they'll do well in that regard. And Cignetti will now get better talent than he has in the past, because everybody wants to go to Indiana now. Everybody wants to be coached by this guy.
Right.
But on the other hand, I know that part of Cignetti's success has been the continuity in his coaching situation, right? He brought a lot of that staff from JMU with him to Indiana.
Right. And
now everyone's seeing that those coaches are great. And so some of them are getting offers to, go be head coaches at other places and things like that. And then Cignetti's going to have to fill those spots with newer people. And so, this kind of network that Cignetti has built around himself, of these coaches that he's very comfortable with and that know his system, is he still going to have the same success once that system starts to break down and he has to replace people? That
will be a challenge. But so far, his coordinators, they both got huge raises, basically are being paid like head coaches now from smaller universities. I mean, unless those coaches get offered a premier job, those coordinators are staying with him.
Right.
Because Indiana stepped up and paid the money.
Right.
Okay. So we'll see. But for right now, the loyalty that his staff is showing him is a throwback to the era of Tom Osborne.
Bob Devaney.
Not Bob Devaney.
Bo Schembechler.
Bo Schembechler, right. Penn State and Joe Paterno, where they had assistants that were with them for 20 years. That is very rare in this day and age, except for Cignetti is one of the few coaches that had guys that have been with him for 10, 12, 14 years. They stayed with him and have grown with him.
Right. All right. Now switching to the Nebraska side of the conversation, we have had some more coaching upheaval since we last did our podcast. I believe at the time we talked about the defensive ends coach, right, that we had gotten. Or I forget, was that for just the defensive tackles. Mm-hmm. But that spot has been filled. But since then, we've had 2 more changes at the coaching position. And one that was kind of surprising and a bit disappointing was that Mike Eckler is leaving as our special teams coach. He's now gone to USC to coach both special teams and linebackers. My understanding is that Mike went to Matt Rule, and wanted to get a defensive job. Wanted to not just be special teams coach. He wanted to kind of move up in the world.
Right.
And we didn't have the position open for him. I believe our linebackers coach is somebody, that we brought in. That was one of Rob Arick's guys. Right. So it sounds like that was kind of the disconnect, and now Mike is gone, which is a shame because he's done a great job as special teams coach. He won one of those coaching awards because of the job that he did with our special teams, and it's been reported that former Nebraska kicker Brett Maher and Nick Humphrey are going to fill in for the special team coach as co-special teams coaches, both of whom have been assistants at Nebraska for a couple years on the younger side of things.
Well, Brent's been with us for a while and obviously has Nebraska roots. And
Nick's was only 1 year.
Nick came with Eckler from Tennessee.
Okay.
And is a young coach, but was coached by Eckler and then became an assistant under him at Tennessee, and then came with him to Nebraska. So that's a young man who's getting that going. Now the whole Eckler thing, the only way I can describe it or summarize it this way: it's very disappointing. He came to Nebraska last year, accepted the job as special teams coordinator only, even though he had been special teams coordinator and had a position at some of his previous stops, including Tennessee. But he knew that coming into the position.
Right.
And to not have the patience after 1 year in your home state with the supposed claim that he wanted to come back to Nebraska because he wanted to be close to his parents who are aging now. And so it was an opportunity for him to be close to his mom and dad, for his kids, all this stuff, his home, blah, 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 all that love, peace stuff. And then after one season, when you don't get the linebacker's job or the defensive ends job or whatever on the defensive side to add to your special teams activity, to me seems a little that's showing a lack of patience. And also, why did you come here in the first place if that was your expectation? Unless you were promised that, and then coach didn't deliver on it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, if he had waited another couple of years and continued to be exceptional as a special teams coach, because here's the thing, it's not that Nebraska wasn't paying him. He was the highest paid special teams coordinator in the country. And we gave him a big raise in October, but he didn't sign the new contract. So he was already planning to jump. He had already made the decision, and he said in his commentary, I think, since then, like at USC or whatever, that basically he knew I was not going to be a special teams coach only ever again. I wanted to have a position, coaching role, and the special teams coordinator's role, if not the defensive coordinator.
So maybe if we want to be charitable to him, maybe he did agree to only be the special teams coach, but as he got into actually doing it, he kind of felt the lack of that defensive role that he had before.
I think so. And so I get it. I mean, he's not necessarily a young chicken. He's in his mid-50s. So it's not like, or early 50s. And so it's not like he's got a ton of time left in his career. And I know that he aspires to be a coordinator and even a head coach. So, get on with it. But, and we shouldn't be surprised as Nebraska fans because
He's-
he had been a guy who had moved a
Right.
lot over the
Right.
years. So he's somebody that high energy that he has that helps him to really establish great special teams play also tends to wear on people, right? And so there's a diminishing return. There's a life cycle with a guy like that.
Right.
And so all I can hope for is that our young coach and Brent Maher learned enough from him about how to create that environment that will be able to sustain that over time. We'll find out.
Yep. And then also our safeties coach, Miles Taylor, who has officially been with Nebraska for all of 1 month, left the program and was instead replaced by Tyler. Well, it's been reported that he's being replaced by Tyler Yelk. That's not official yet, just like Brett Maher and Nick Humphrey aren't official, but it's being reported by the sources in the know, so it seems like a pretty good deal. And he was a defensive assistant at the Eagles, and has coached with Bob Aurick at several different stops in the past. So he's, it's clear to me that Rule is putting a lot of faith in Rob Aurick.
When you hire a defensive coordinator,
Yeah.
and opportunities on defense come open, then as a head coach, you darn well better lean heavily into what your coordinator wants.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's destined to leave, right? You're
Right.
not giving him the ability to create his own side of the ball.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the right thing to do. The fact that the other guy left, with 11 head coaches in the NFL being fired this year, and the previous guy was coming to us from the NFL, there were just so many opportunities. And so his network of friends and connections had some shifts moving around. And so he had a guy who had taken a new job as a coordinator in the NFL who said, hey, I want you. And he had no loyalty, no time invested in Nebraska. So he's like, okay, this is the best thing for my family and I to go back into the NFL. So he did it. And so that doesn't surprise me. And I feel like this guy that we got, if you just look at the resume on paper, probably pretty similar to the guy that we lost. So I don't think it's some net huge loss. Now, I may be completely wrong, but if it's a guy that Aurick wanted, that makes me feel better because then Aurick's got to take the ownership for that hire, right?
Right. Like you say, it's his squad, so to speak, that we're bringing in.
Yep.
And then in terms of the transfer portal and recruiting, there are a few updates compared to where we were when we last podcasted in mid-March or mid-January. And we got a few more linemen, which I know makes you happy. We got a Pittsburgh defensive lineman, Josh Whittington, LSU offensive lineman, Paul Mubenga, and Boston College defensive tackle, Owen Stoudemire.
Mm-hmm. Now, that still doesn't change dramatically my overall view that we failed miserably at acquiring the defensive line talent that we needed, specifically defensive tackles.
Right.
And number two, we needed a running back with some experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't get it. And to me, not even really, we didn't even really try that hard for a running back, which is a head scratcher to me. And then defensive tackle, we did try, but we obviously weren't willing to write the big enough check because we got in on some guys that I think could have been difference makers for us. They were people who had the size and had experience playing Division I Power 4 football that we could have benefited from.
Right.
Instead, we're going to go into next season with the guys we already had who really struggled in their role as defensive tackles, in part because they were young and undersized. Okay? Now we're going to still have those same young and undersized guys who are hopefully now going to be a year older, maybe a little bigger, a little stronger, all that sort of stuff, but still an unproven talent, right? They may have potential, but they don't have performance, right?
Yeah.
We needed to go get some performance, and we tried, and we let ourselves get outbid by Kentucky and Florida and Ole Miss. All these SEC schools who kept writing bigger checks, okay? Or doing something else that enticed these guys at the last minute away from us. And that's a problem. and it's going to show up again next year. I'm not going to accept Coach Rule's, we're going to be fine along the defensive line. No, you're not. And at running back, we have a guy with if you look at the Big Ten rosters of running backs for all Big Ten universities, okay?
Right.
We are at the bottom in terms of the number of touchdowns returning, the number of yards returning, and it's not even close.
Well, part of that is that we lean so heavily on.
So then go get yourself a proven running back. Right. One. I'm not asking you to go get 3. Go get one guy who has actually ran for 10 or 20 touchdowns in a season in the Power 4.
Right.
And we didn't do that. Now, we've got some young talent that might be very good.
Right. The guy who did well in the bowl game.
Yeah, Mekhi Nelson.
Right.
But they're undersized. They have no experience. They're not proven. And in this day and age, what does the Indiana-Miami game teach us? You have to have proven talent. And if you don't, you got to go out and at least get somebody who might be adequate at it. If you can't get the superstar, get somebody who has performance proven. Get that guy.
Right. And
sorry for yelling.
And experience, right?
Right.
Like both Miami and Indiana were very experienced rosters. So that's been proven to be significant as well, which is not a surprise. That's been true of football for a long time. But now, you have, especially with the COVID year still lingering on everything, some players who have been in their 6th or 7th year, and things like that. Like Carson Beck, right? I mean,
right.
He's been around for ages.
Right, exactly. And so I just think it is not a positive indication of Pat Stewart, our general manager, that Rule hired last year, who came in with all this NFL, general management experience, and failed in 2 areas that I think were so obviously going to be weaknesses for our team in this upcoming season, and they laid an egg in those 2 categories. Now, we might have some good young talent. I'm not saying we don't, but in the formula and the structure that the NCAA has right now, you cannot go into a season in the Big Ten with only three touchdowns and 480 yards of rushing from your entire running back room. You cannot do that.
Right.
Not in this day and age of NIL and portal. You have to go get something. And the fact that we did not, to me, says the leadership, and that includes Matt Rule and Pat and the coordinators, they screwed up. That needed to be a bigger priority, in my opinion. And I think it's going to play out this year. That at the end of 2026, I will not at all be shocked if we're saying, boy, we couldn't stop the run again. Our defensive line was inadequate, and we could not establish a running game because we didn't have a bell cow back. And when we didn't know, when none of the young guys were ready for that role, we didn't have anybody else we could turn to.
To put out one ray of hope here for the Nebraska fans out there, Emmett's numbers the previous year in 2024 weren't great either, right?
I agree.
And he made big strides in the offseason
right.
and came in a transformed player, as we all saw.
Yep.
So it's always possible that happens, with our development team and
right.
that running backs coach and everything. So
and again, in the past, prior to 3 years ago, then development was the name of the game. Every year, every team had positions that had that situation.
Right.
But now, again, if you look at that list of the Big Ten, everyone else either had somebody or they went and got somebody because they all understood you got to have somebody who's proven that you can lean back on if the young guys or the unexperienced guys aren't yet ready.
Right.
We have given ourselves no fallback.
Right.
We are 100% in to our necks on whatever these guys can do, and it's completely unproven.
Right.
And you can't do that in the NIL portal era.
Right.
You cannot do it.
Well, and so last thing I wanted to ask about the Nebraska football side of the discussion is Has your faith in Matt Rule been shaken a bit in terms of his overall kind of vision for the program and qualities as a leader amongst his coaching staff? Because all of the coaching turnover we've had in this offseason, some of which was instigated by Matt because, he fired coaches that were underperforming, but also, coaches like Eckler leaving, when they've had success and things like that. It is, I'm kind of uncertain of how much do we just blame on, that's the way coaching is now, and Eckler, jumps ship all the time, blah, 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 versus, Matt promises, that he's got this vision in place and that, he's good at, bringing the team together and getting a good group of coaches, that have analytical mindsets or whatever. But in practice, it's not working out, or there's friction between him and his coaches, and that's why they're leaving.
I would say that, yes, my confidence has been shaken. He is a very dynamic guy. He's a dynamic leader on that part of the business. But I also think that he is probably a little inconsistent in his messaging, and he's all over the map. One day he's saying this, and these are the priorities, and then 3 days later, because a game happened and this part of the team didn't do well, he's all over here now. And so that lack of consistency, I think, probably drives a certain number of coaches crazy. I think he's hard to work for.
Right. And we know he demands a lot from his coaching staff.
Well, and he ain't the only coach that demands a lot from his assistants.
Certainly.
But you need to have enough of a continuity in messaging and some stability in that vision, to believe that, okay, I can buy into what this guy's all about, right? And I'm less confident that Matt has that understood. I feel like again, if Matt had come back to the college game after his NFL experience, and it was still the same. There was no NIL, there was no portals and all that stuff, and he could develop young coaches and develop players. I think his dynamics as a person would have lent and been a great strength. I think in this new situation that we're in, I'm less sure.
Right.
Right? And so he needs to figure out what he's doing. Interestingly, I'll talk to any microphone that's put in front of me. Matt Rule has gone silent for 45 days. He has said virtually nothing publicly since the bowl game, right? Like he has gone silent. Mm-hmm. And he's basically that's what this offseason is going to be about now. So he's going to totally swing the
pendulum.
The pendulum in terms of his approach. And he's all about, we have nothing to say because our performance on the field was so bad that we can't say anything until we prove it on the field. And that's fine. I get that mentality. But that is 180 from what you were last year. That's 180 from the House Rules podcast that he was doing every week, which hasn't happened again since the season was over. There's been no more podcasts.
Right.
Which,
so,
maybe there was going to be anyway.
Right.
But I get that.
Maybe that was the plan. But I do get what you're saying, right? Like also how we talked, I believe, on the previous podcast or one of the podcasts before the bowl game, I believe it was, about how Matt had been kind of hands-off in terms of actually getting into the trenches and coaching the players, right? And he was being more of the manager guy, running the whole organization. And he talked about how he was enjoying kind of getting into it with the defensive line, because that coach had been fired.
But he couldn't. But he couldn't just do it. He had to turn his hat around and make a big deal about the fact I'm Coach Matt now. So now I've turned my hat around. So then all the press conference leading up to the bowl game and everything, his hat was always turned around, right?
Right.
And it's like that kind of shit. Just, I think you're not coaching high school kids. It wears on people.
Right.
That hokey kind of, gotta have a shtick.
I didn't even know about that, honestly. So I was even talking about that just more so, he's shown a ability to, see where he's made mistakes and correct it.
Yes.
Like we just said about, being more hands-on with the players, or what you're saying about, now going into more of a silent mode rather than talking to every microphone, which I think is, good from a perspective of him being humble and being able to adapt to the changes in the college football world and everything like that.
Yep.
But it also does shake my faith in terms of, like, once again, him coming in with this vision of how things were going to go. It's clear that it hasn't worked out the way he thought it would.
No. Well, and he's still trying to figure out the formula.
Right.
And I get it.
A lot of coaches are.
Exactly. He's not alone. He's absolutely not alone. And the Signetti thing has just ratcheted up the pressure on every damn coach to figure it out and figure it out now.
Right.
Okay. And yet, if you listen to Signetti, he's basically telling you what you got to do.
Yeah.
You got to go find performance. You got to find. It doesn't matter that they played at JMU or they played at some historically black college or they played at Ohio University or Ferris State even. You go find a guy who's played some college football with big boys, okay, and they've done well with it. They've taken the hits, they've delivered the hits, whatever, and they've performed. That's the guy you want. And you don't have to pay big dollars for him necessarily. Because if you can find the guy, okay, and other people aren't looking at him, which is what Signetti was able to do during his first couple of years. Now, I guarantee you, there are going to be plenty of schools that are going to hunt, and they're going to try to follow Signetti. Now, the difference is recruiting, it was pretty obvious what other schools, who they were recruiting. Because there would be all kinds of information flowing, there would be all this coverage, and you knew who teams visits. Were. Right. Now with the portal, that shit happens so fast, okay? And that's the other thing Nebraska hasn't figured out. How did all these other schools lock these kids up for visits before they were able to talk with people, right? Before the portal opportunity opened, by the time the first day's there, all the great defensive tackles, they've already got 3 visits scheduled from other schools. How did that happen? And Nebraska never got in on those guys.
Right.
In my opinion, failure of Pat Stewart. Failure of Matt Rule and his staff. Yep. Period. You had to figure out whatever these other people were doing to cheat and to get that information to the people that they were targeting and to have them already arranged so that as soon as it officially opened, it was one phone call and we got your flights already ready for you. We'll see you tomorrow. That happened a ton, but not for Nebraska. Why?
Right.
How did you miss the boat on how everyone else was cheating? Because everybody's cheating.
Yeah.
In this day and age right now. So, now I know people say, that's not cheating. There's no rules. And that's true. The rules aren't being enforced. What they say that they wanted people to do and what people do, 2 separate things. And if there aren't punishments and specific rules for how they can and can't do it, then you find a way. And other teams did and we didn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. And we've talked about that on the past podcast, and that's been made obvious by this recruiting cycle here.
It really has.
Now, in terms of other Nebraska sports, we want to quickly mention the basketball team. Last time we talked, they were still undefeated. We were about to go into the Michigan game, which we knew was going to be a tough one because they're one of the top-ranked teams in the country. And so we did lose to number 2 ranked Michigan by just a couple points. We were actually in the lead for most of the game.
Right.
So we played competitive there.
And we were playing with 2 of our 5 starters out.
Right.
And we still almost beat them at Michigan.
Right. And then since then, we've also lost to number 8 Illinois and to number 13 Purdue. So the high that basketball was on has been knocked down a bit by those losses, but we're still doing very well compared to our historical standard. We're still looking like we're going to make the NCAA tournament and that kind of thing.
Right.
But where would you kind of grade our current performance?
Well, it's kind of classic. You haven't been there before. So as soon as the pressure ratcheted up because they were 20-0 and, people began to talk about the possibility of a Big Ten championship run. And then we laid an egg. Now, part of that is much like our volleyball team this past year. Amazing how our kids get deathly sick and have all kinds of crazy shit happen when the chips are down.
Right.
What is going on with our health situation where our players are the ones that end up with the sickness? Now, I'll concede there's two things. Nebraska's weather really sucks in the winter, okay? And it's windy as all get out, which tends to help move around viruses. It tends to help move stuff around.
Right.
And so maybe Nebraska's a little more susceptible to that sort of stuff than areas where, you don't have the crazy wind and the crazy cold like they do in Nebraska.
Right.
But if that's true, figure it out and do what you got to do. If you got to be pumping those kids full of vitamin C and whatever other, things to keep them from Rink Mass, our center, our big 6'10" guy, was so sick that he could not play. Ended up in the hospital with an IV, and
Wow.
ended up really losing multiple games because he tried to play the next game and he was completely ineffective in the game against Illinois. Did not score a point until the last 2 minutes of the game, and then he scored a couple of wasted baskets after the decision was decided.
Right.
We were never in that game because Rink couldn't give us anything. Okay, he probably shouldn't have even been playing. And after that game, he went back in to get another IV.
Right.
Because he was just a mess. He was a fraction of himself. How are we getting that sick? Same thing happened to our volleyball team. There's something wrong there. Okay,
Well,
so
let me just say,
our folks need to get that figured out.
I like your idea of we got to do whatever it takes to protect them from the wind or whatever. So I'm just imagining them going down to their classes or whatever on campus in one of like those
Bubble.
Yeah, the bubbles like you'd see in a movie, and they're just rolling down it. Like you'd see during COVID or whatever.
That's funny.
Yeah.
But yes, it's crazy. But so again, my point being, we were at this huge crux where we had 3 top 15 teams in a matter of about 10 days. We lost all of them. 2 of them we played at home, and one of the home games we just got beat. The other home game should have won.
We went in overtime.
Went into overtime. Rink Mass again missed a free throw with 7 seconds to go that would have given us a lead. It would have been the first lead in the entire game because we gave them a 14-0 lead to start the game. Literally, it was like 14-1 at the beginning of the game.
Right.
Or 14-2. And they actually ended up with a lead that I think was as great as 20 or 22 or something like that. And then we came all the way storming back, but then ran out of gas at the end. Again, I think it's a fitness. So there's something wrong there with all of the money that we spent. We've got with state-of-the-art, medical facility and food processing and all that. Our training table is the best, blah, 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 blah. And yet our athletes keep getting sick when the chips are down at the end of seasons. I think it's a trend, and we need to address it.
Well, technically, this isn't the end of the basketball season. They still got
towards the end,
the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament after that.
And we're going to make the tournament.
Yes.
We're going to make the tournament. But now the big question is, after losing 3 of the last 4 games, we have a game tomorrow, as we're doing this podcast, against a Northwestern team that is in the lower half of the Big Ten. But it's a Northwestern team that probably should have beaten Michigan, who's number 1 in the league, just a couple days ago. So this is not a team you can take lightly, because there's no team in the Big Ten that you can take lightly.
Right.
And so if we go out there with low energy, like we started against Purdue, where we basically just let Purdue out hustle us for every ball and just had the defensive intensity, and we just were sleepwalking. And if our team does that again, Northwestern's going to beat us, and this is going to get really ugly for Nebraska basketball. They need to understand that they have to give 110% every damn game, and they've got to find a way to be ready to do that. And in this time of the year, I know there's still, it's not Rink Mass now, he's probably healthy now, but there's 2 other guys on that roster right now, at least, that are probably battling whatever the bug was that Rink had.
Right.
And we better have those guys pumped full of whatever, chemicals needed to get them to overcome that. And why is that happening to us when it's not happening to that level? It's happening to everybody, but it's not happening to that level at other schools. What's going on in our system?
Right. All right. We'll come back to you with the medical report on next podcast episode. And then lastly, on the volleyball front, we got some good news in that Jalen Reyes, one of our assistant coaches on the volleyball side of things, has been promoted to associate head coach, a longtime assistant under John Cook, who's stayed with us now under the new system. And also, we're able to sign new contracts with some of our players to confirm that they're staying with Nebraska for the next year and all that. So that's all good news.
Right. So, yeah, we've gotten stability in the staff. Reyes is great. And also our other two assistants also got extensions. So it appears that all three of them are going to be staying with the program for another year. And I kind of was suspect that at least one of those three, and most likely Reyes, was going to move on after the 1-year transition with DBK. But the fact that we were able to retain all three of them, I think, is a really positive thing. And the fact that we've now gone through 2 years of portal windows in volleyball and not had anybody leave, it speaks volume. I don't know that there's a lot of other programs out there, certainly not any of the premier programs at the very top, that have gone 2 years in a row without any departures from their roster, right?
Right.
And that's particularly surprising given the fact that our roster was filled with people that were sitting the bench that could play for probably 85% of the other schools in the NCAA. They would be starters, maybe even, stars for other teams. But they were willing to subjugate their role on the team to stay with Nebraska volleyball. Now, maybe that ends this spring because there's still 2 portal windows in volleyball. And so there'll be another one at spring practice. So the question will be, will we potentially lose somebody at that point? We'll see.
Right.
But I'm going to say I now doubt it. I think we are going to stay the course with this group, and our new players are already here. Our freshmen have all graduated early and are going to be here for the spring. So they're going to be able to participate in the beach volleyball and the spring volleyball period. So some positive things going on there for the program for sure.
Yeah. So that's obviously good news to hear. We'll be coming back to you in March to talk about more news in the world of college football, both nationally and with Nebraska football. Our spring game is back this year now that the spring transfer portal window is gone from football.
Yes.
Matt Rule will be doing a proper spring game again March 28th this year.
Yeah, it's very early.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised by that. So we'll definitely come back and do a proper podcast before that game and come to you afterwards, talk about the result of it, of course. I know it's a long wait for you to get back into football season. Now the NFL is also finished up, so we're officially completely done with football. But, we might have some fun watching the NCAA tournament this year for basketball.
That would be nice. The goal here is to win one game, get at least one victory in the NCAA tournament.
Right. And then we'll see where we go from there. It's all upside from there.
That's right.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast. You can email us at collegefootballthrowdown@gmail.com. You can also search for College Football Throwdown on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave us a rating or review there. We always love hearing feedback from the fans. Or you can search for us on YouTube under College Football Throwdown if you prefer to listen to us there. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me in person for this special episode.
This was fun.
Yes. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.